Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the GTX 950. The point of this card was to combine 1080p gaming and affordability, something I feel that it did very well back in 2015. 6 years on, and while it's certainly still affordable, at least on some second-hand markets, the 2GB of VRAM included with this and every 950 could be a problem nowadays. The Asus version I've got here looks great and is near silent in operation, but the question is, how well does it play games in 2021? Kicking things off with Cyberpunk 2077, and for a 30fps plus experience, utilising dynamic resolution is essential. The game is set by default to 1080p with the low preset, textures and crowd density. Everything is on low. Dynamic resolution is also enabled, which will mean that the game plays at anywhere from 1920 by 1080 to 60% of that in order to try and maintain at least 30 frames per second, which is a more realistic target for this card in 2021. With that said, hitting or even exceeding 60 frames per second is also possible, but we do have to make some pretty hefty sacrifices to the visual quality in order to get there. I'm talking 50% of 720p sort of sacrifices. I'm actually quite surprised at how well things are still recognisable. It's clear Cyberpunk is in here somewhere underneath the eye strain and headache inducing graphics. Call of Duty Cold War offered acceptable performance at 1080p with everything set to low or off and anti-aliasing set to high to eliminate the otherwise nasty jagged edges. While 47fps isn't ideal in a competitive first-person game like this one, it still performed better than I expected. To actually hit a more suitable 60fps, we don't have to make too many sacrifices. Simply reducing the render scale to 75% will do the trick and then some, with the average frame rate increasing to over 70. Depending on personal preferences, you can either reduce the resolution scale in games that support it, or drop the native resolution. I prefer lowering the scaling personally as it retains the sharpness of the UI. Crysis Remastered has no such option aside from DLSS, which can only be used with higher end graphics cards. That said, the GTX 950 will still run the game at 60fps even at 1080p with the low preset. You may have noticed the frame time graph, which appears to exhibit some serious spikes. These spikes indicate little stutters within the game, and unfortunately they can be felt here. While the average frame rate is decent, the 1 and 0.1% lows reflect a juddery experience. This problem is pretty much eliminated at 900p. While there are certainly still frame rate dips that occur when things explode or when smoke fills the screen, there are no gameplay stutters anymore and the game feels a lot more responsive and enjoyable. It still looks decent as well even at the low preset. I'm a big fan of the Crysis Remastered series and I can't wait to play 2 and 3 again, which will probably be out by the time that this video releases. The newest title on today's benchmark lineup is Far Cry 6. It ran very well on the minimum spec machine we built the other day, which consisted of a 960. I'm pleased to say that it still maintains at least 30fps with the weaker 950 here as well, which performance-wise is more akin to the last gen consoles, even though it doesn't quite look as good here. Still, the 950 with its 2GB of VRAM is putting up one heck of a fight. Thanks to the implementation of FSR, we can also hit a 60fps average. Retaining 1080p as a base resolution and choosing the performance FSR mode, which will admittedly reduce visual quality quite noticeably, we were able to squeeze 60fps out of the newest Far Cry. If you wanted a close to 60 frames per second experience but don't mind a more 50 FPS-ish average, then the balanced FSR mode would keep a more refined and sharp look to the visuals while keeping performance smoother than a native 1920 by 1080 would. With Fortnite, I only tested the game once at medium settings with 1080p resolution because it ran fine with at least 60fps. I don't think there's any real need to push the visual quality any higher. Medium quality, straight out of the box with nothing else adjusted, gives us a nice combination of visuals and frame rate with an average exceeding 80. The percentile figures were also respectable, but I did experience one or two minor stutters. Nothing to be too concerned with though. In GTA 5 I did the same thing, just a single test here with the high settings. The detail sliders were all set to max and everything was set to high apart from all MSAA options which were off. The texture quality was also set to normal to avoid exceeding the VRAM limitation of the card. We saw decent figures all round here, including respectable percentile lows. Now of course GTA came out on PC the same year as this graphics card was released, so it's no surprise that this once mid-range piece of hardware can run the game well at 1920 by 1080 with mostly high detail settings. Next up it's Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. I've always accepted 30 FPS as playable here due to the nature of the game. Some of you may feel differently, but maybe it's because I've spent more time with this on Xbox Series X than on PC. Anyway, the game runs a lot better than it did at launch, and even the 950 with its limited memory can hit at least 30 FPS with the low-end preset at 1080p. Real-time weather is enabled, and even at low, the game looks very good. Somehow the game still looks respectable at half of 1080p as well. With the resolution scale slider set to 50%, we can squeeze 60 FPS out of this card, though that figure will vary depending on where you are and what you're flying over. Some parts of the world are far more demanding than others. If like me you spend most of your time in flight sim with your plane in the sky, which I hope you would do, then you're going to be getting a playable experience with the aging 950. In order to save our visual settings in Red Dead Redemption 2, we have to be able to fall beneath the game's imposed limitation from within the graphical menu. To do this, we have to use the low preset and 80% scale. TAA is on and set to medium because it seriously smooths out the jagged edges and makes the game easier on the eyes. Performance is good, but the worst part about low settings here are the textures, which don't look too good. With that said, we can actually force high textures from within the game's settings file and still retain a 30 FPS plus average, just about. We're still using 80% of 1080p, which looks okay, but the high textures more than make up for the sacrifice to native res, in my opinion. Finally, we have Resident Evil Village, a brilliant game that I'm still yet to finish because the only free time I have at the moment is at night, and there's no way I'm playing this in the dark. 1080p and the prioritised performance preset will mean at least 30 frames per second, quite comfortably so to be honest. There's no stutter to speak of here either, and visually the game still looks pretty good. Just like in Far Cry 6, the game supports FSR, which can be utilised on Nvidia cards as well as AMD. Even Intel HD graphics can use it. Keeping the same preset and enabling the balanced FSR mode will do the trick for 60 FPS, though the performance mode might be a better choice to avoid dips to the mid-40s. As cards like the 950 age and start to suffer from their lack of both VRAM and power in 2021, their saving grace could very well be FSR and dynamic resolution implementation. The more games that utilise such features, the better. The 950 is very much better suited to lower than 1080p resolutions in 2021 or reduced resolution scales. This Maxwell GPU is also still supported with the latest drivers as of October 2021, so it's got that going for it as well. It can still game, but I'd certainly see how much more expensive the 960 is where you live, especially the 4GB versions, because that would be a better choice if it's not significantly higher in price. As for this one then, well, this has been a look back at the GTX 950. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.